Welcome. Tonight, I will tell you a quiet story about a dream that was almost forgotten. But in the small, foggy city of Oakhaven, this evening felt completely different. Something strange was hiding in the cold air, waiting to change a man's life forever. Oakhaven was a city built of gray stone and narrow cobblestone streets. It sat on a high cliff above a dark, restless sea. The salty wind blew through the streets every morning, and by the afternoon, a thick white fog always covered the houses. The fog was so thick that people walked closely together, hiding inside their heavy winter coats. In the very center of this quiet, damp city stood a small shop with a faded wooden sign. If you stood outside its heavy, iron-bound door, you could hear a very specific, rhythmic sound. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was the sound of dozens of clocks, big and small, all beating together like tiny metal hearts in the dark. The owner of this shop was a man named Elias. Elias was a clockmaker with silver hair, deeply wrinkled hands, and tired gray eyes. He was a deeply talented man, but he was also a profoundly fearful man. Every day, from the early morning until the late night, he sat at his scarred wooden desk and fixed cheap, ordinary watches. He replaced broken glass for farmers. He cleaned dirty iron gears for the local fishermen. The people of Oakhaven liked Elias because his work was safe, simple, and perfectly reliable. He never made a mistake, and he never took a risk. But Elias was hiding a secret. Deep inside his bottom desk drawer, buried under rusty tools, broken springs, and pieces of dirty metal, lay a heavy, dusty leather sketchbook. He never showed it to anyone, not to his friends, not to his customers. Inside its yellow pages was a beautiful, complex drawing of a machine he called the Clock of Destiny. It was a magnificent dream, a true masterpiece of imagination. But Elias had never tried to build it, because he deeply believed he was not good enough. He did not know that this evening the thick fog outside his window would bring a visitor who would test that belief forever. The sun slowly rose over the gray stones of Oakhaven, bringing a pale, weak light into the city. The fog lifted just enough to let the morning begin. Elias went to work, just like every other day of his long life. He unlocked the heavy front door with a cold iron key, turned on the small, warm brass lamps, and sat down at his familiar wooden desk. For many long hours, his silver head was bent over the table. He wore a thick magnifying glass strapped over his right eye, carefully studying a tiny broken gear inside a farmer's pocket watch. It was a cheap, ordinary watch, covered in dried dirt from the potato fields, but Elias fixed it perfectly. He treated the cheap metal with total respect. By midday, the small shop was warm and busy. A local baker walked in, smelling of fresh bread, butter, and sweet sugar. He picked up his repaired wooden wall clock and smiled warmly at the old man. "Thank you, Elias," the baker said, handing him a few silver coins. "You are always so reliable. We are lucky to have such a safe, steady clockmaker in our town. You never change, my friend. You are always here when we need you." Elias smiled politely and nodded his head. "Thank you. It is just ordinary work," he replied softly. It felt good to help his neighbors. It felt safe to be needed for small, simple things. But when the afternoon ended, the light in the sky turned from pale yellow to deep purple and gray. The last customer buttoned his thick winter coat and walked out the door into the returning fog. Instantly, the warm satisfaction in the room completely disappeared, leaving behind a cold, heavy silence. The shadow of the setting sun stretched long and dark across the scratched wooden floor. The shop became perfectly still, leaving only the endless, mocking ticking of the clocks on the wall. Tick-tock, tick-tock. In that cold loneliness, Elias lowered his head. He let out the heavy sigh of an old man who was deeply tired. It was not his physical body that was tired. It was his spirit. His soul was completely exhausted from living a life that was too small for him. Slowly, his rough, wrinkled hands reached down to the bottom drawer of his desk. He pulled the brass handle. He took out the heavy, dusty leather sketchbook, blew the gray dust off the cover, and opened it to the middle page. There it was, the Clock of Destiny. It was a grand, impossible machine. In his detailed, beautiful drawing, the clock had dozens of shining silver stars, a deep blue painted sky, a golden moon, and delicate gears that moved like pure poetry. It was a masterpiece of human imagination. Elias gently touched the old yellow paper with his bruised fingers. A deep, painful longing filled his chest. He wanted to build it. He had wanted to build it for 20 long years. But I am not a master, he thought sadly, staring at the perfect drawing. I am just a simple man who fixes cheap, broken things. This dream is too big for my small, tired hands. If I try to build it, I will only ruin it. I will only prove that I am a failure. Fear grabbed his heart like a cold, heavy hand. Before the feeling of hope could grow any stronger, Elias quickly closed the heavy book. He locked it back inside the dark drawer, hiding his grand dream behind his ordinary, safe life. He picked up his metal tools and returned to cleaning a simple, dirty iron watch, desperately trying to forget the beautiful machine in his mind. He believed his quiet discomfort was something he would live with forever. He thought he would quietly fade away in the small room, safe and forgotten. But the safe, dusty life was about to be broken. The easiest way to ignore a powerful dream is to stay very busy. If your hands are always moving, you do not have to listen to your own heart. For the next few weeks, Elias did exactly that. He accepted every single repair job in the foggy city of Oakhaven. Soon, a massive, messy pile of broken watches covered his wooden desk. There were silver pocket watches with completely cracked glass. There were heavy brass wall clocks that would not chime anymore. There were cheap iron timers covered in thick brown rust. Elias worked from the early, dark hours of the cold morning until very late at night. He let the endless, repetitive ticking fill his ears, drowning out his own thoughts. He used his busy, bleeding hands to deny the quiet, persistent voice in his soul. He told himself that he was doing important work. He told himself he was useful. But the avoidance of a dream is a very heavy weight to carry. It makes a gentle person bitter. One rainy afternoon, the shop was cold and damp. His young apprentice, a bright-eyed boy named Leo, was sweeping the wooden floor. Leo was 15 years old, full of boundless energy and grand ideas. The boy stopped sweeping and leaned on his wooden broom. He watched Elias carefully replace a microscopic metal spring inside a damaged watch. The boy's eyes were full of innocent wonder and deep respect. "Master Elias," Leo said softly, his voice full of admiration, "you have such incredible hands. You know how every single piece of metal works. You fix everything so perfectly. Why do you never build your own clock? Something grand? Something the whole world will remember you for?" The innocent question hit Elias like a sharp stone thrown in the dark. The air in the small shop suddenly felt incredibly tight. Deep inside Elias's chest, a fast wave of fear, bitter regret, and defensive pride rushed up into his throat. His hands began to shake. He dropped his metal tools on the desk with a loud, aggressive clatter. "We do not build, Leo," Elias snapped. The sharp, angry tone of his voice echoed violently off the stone walls. "We repair. The world does not need foolish, impossible dreams. It needs reliable men who fix what is broken. Dreams do not put food on the table. Now, finish your sweeping and go home immediately." Leo jumped back in complete surprise. His bright eyes widened with shock. He had never seen his gentle, quiet master so angry. The boy swallowed hard, nodded his head quickly, and finished sweeping in absolute silence. He grabbed his coat and hurried out the heavy door into the cold, pouring rain. When Elias was finally alone again, the anger in his chest melted into a deep, painful shame. He looked down at his shaking, wrinkled hands. He knew the absolute truth. He was not angry at the innocent boy. He was furiously angry at himself. He was angry at his own cowardice. He pulled open the bottom drawer one more time. He stared at the dark leather sketchbook, wishing with all his heart that he had the courage to open it. "It is too late," he thought bitterly, a single tear forming in his gray eye. "I am old. I am tired. It is much too late." With a heavy sigh, Elias took a small brass key from his vest pocket. He pushed the drawer shut, slid the metal key inside, and turned it. He listened to the cold, final sound of a heavy iron key turning in a lock. He thought locking away his dream would finally bring him peace. He was wrong. Destiny does not knock softly on your door. Sometimes, it breaks the door down completely. It was late in the evening when a fierce, violent storm crashed over the city of Oakhaven. The dark ocean crashed against the tall gray cliffs, sending salty water high into the air. The freezing wind howled terribly through the narrow cobblestone streets, and heavy thunder rattled the thin window glass of the small clock shop. Inside, the room was dimly lit by only two small, flickering candles. The mundane, safe quiet of the shop felt heavy and depressing as Elias slowly prepared to lock up for the night. He put on his thick wool coat and was just reaching for the brass handle of his front door. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door burst open. A fierce gust of freezing, salty wind blew into the room, instantly blowing out the candles. Standing in the doorway was a tall, imposing, and mysterious traveler. The man was wearing a heavy, dark winter cloak that covered his entire body. Rain was dripping violently from the dark cloth onto the wooden floor in small, steady drops. The man did not move. He just stood there, blocking the exit like a dark shadow that had suddenly come to life. Elias stepped back, his heart beating wildly in his chest. "I am sorry, sir," Elias said, his voice shaking with sudden fear. "The shop is closed for the night. The weather is too dangerous outside. You must go home and find shelter." The stranger did not answer. He stepped fully into the room and walked slowly to the main counter. His face was completely hidden in the deep, dark shadows of his wet hood. Without speaking a single word, he reached deep inside his wet cloak and pulled out an object. He gently placed it on the dark, scratched wood of Elias's desk. The ordinary, boring feeling of the room was completely shattered. Elias gasped loudly. Sitting on the table was a perfectly crafted, glowing golden gear. It was not just polished metal. It seemed to be magically alive. It was shining with a warm, impossible light that pushed away the sowy, dark shadows of the terrible storm. The beautiful golden light danced on the cold stone walls. What is this beautiful thing?" Elias whispered. He was completely mesmerized. He was unable to look away from the magnificent object. "It is the heart," the stranger said. His voice was incredibly deep, echoing through the small room like a grand, ancient church bell. "It is the living heart of the machine you hide in your locked drawer." Elias felt a cold shock of pure terror travel down his spine. He stopped breathing for a moment. How could this mysterious man know about his secret sketchbook? How could he know about the clock of destiny? No one knew. "You have hidden from your own potential for too long, Elias," the traveler demanded, pointing a long, pale finger at the glowing gear. "You have let fear control your entire life. Now you must finally build it. You have until the first snow of winter to finish the clock. If you fail or if you refuse to try, this golden piece will turn to ordinary, useless dust, and your dream will disappear forever. You will be left with nothing but your own regret." Before Elias could ask a single question, before he could say he was not ready, the stranger turned around. He walked quickly back out into the violent, black night. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him with a loud crash. The room was silent again, except for the heavy rain beating against the glass. Elias stood frozen in place. He stared at the glowing metal resting quietly on his desk. He was terrified. But for the first time in 20 long years, his spirit felt truly awake. By the time the storm passed, nothing in his life would be the same. Building a dream is never as beautiful as imagining it. In the quiet safety of the mind, a dream is light, fast, and perfect. There are no painful mistakes in the mind, but in the real, physical world, bringing a grand dream to life is an incredibly heavy task. It requires sweat, physical pain, absolute frustration, and endless quiet patience. The very next morning, Elias did not open his shop to the public. He turned the heavy wooden closed sign toward the street. He cleared away all the cheap, broken watches, the rusty springs, and the dirty glass from his desk. He wiped the wood clean. Then, he placed the dusty leather sketchbook in the exact center of the dark wooden table. Beside it, he carefully set the glowing golden gear. He took a deep breath, picked up his sharpest, finest tools, and began the impossible task of building the clock of destiny. The daily work was incredibly difficult. Elias had spent 20 years repairing small, simple, existing things. Now, he was trying to create a complex, moving masterpiece from absolute nothing. He had to travel to the distant market to buy thick sheets of expensive brass and delicate silver. He had to heat the metal in a roaring fire until his face burned. He had to bend heavy iron with his own failing strength. His old, tired hands cramped with sharp, terrible pain. His fingers bled onto the polished metal. Soon, he had to wrap his aching, bruised skin in thick white cloth just to hold a hammer. Day after day, week after week, the quiet shop was filled with the harsh, ugly sound of metal scraping against metal. He worked through the windy, gray autumn. He worked through the freezing, bitter cold. He worked through his own terrible, screaming doubt. The brown leaves outside his window died and blew away in the bitter wind. As the weeks passed slowly, the real war began inside his own mind. Every time a piece of metal did not fit perfectly, his brain attacked his confidence without mercy. "You are a fool." The dark, familiar voice in his head whispered late at night. "Look at you. You are just an ordinary, tired, useless watchmaker. You will never finish this masterpiece." The stranger made a mistake. "You are wasting the little time you have left." One freezing November evening, Elias was trying to connect a delicate, incredibly thin silver wheel to the magical golden gear. His hands were shaking violently from exhaustion. His eyes were burning. Suddenly, his heavy metal tool slipped. Snap! The delicate silver wheel broke into two completely useless pieces. Elias dropped his tools on the wooden floor with a heavy thud. He was entirely exhausted, physically and mentally. He looked across the dark room at the cold, dying fire in the stone hearth. For a long, incredibly dangerous moment, he picked up the glowing golden gear. He walked slowly toward the fireplace. He was ready to throw the magical heart into the dirty, gray ashes. He was ready to give up on his destiny forever. The pain of failing was simply too much to bear. He desperately wanted to go back to his safe, comfortable, quiet life where nothing great was ever expected of him. But as he held the gear near the ashes, its warm golden light shone brightly on his tired, wrinkled face. It did not judge him. It did not yell at him for his mistakes. It only waited patiently, shining with a quiet promise. Elias closed his eyes, swallowed his bitter fear, and walked slowly back to his wooden desk. He would not let his fear win tonight. The sharp frustration of the broken tools slowly faded away, replaced by the quiet, determined hope of trying again the next morning. Piece by painful piece, over many long weeks, the magnificent machine finally came together. The clock was finally complete, but the hardest test of his entire life was waiting for him in the silence of the final night. The final piece was in place, but the room was perfectly, terrifyingly silent. It was exactly midnight. The air inside the shop was freezing, so cold that Elias could clearly see his own breath in the pale light. The thick, gray clouds outside the window were heavy with ice. The first snow of winter was coming tonight. He had run out of time. Standing in the center of his scarred wooden desk was the completed Clock of Destiny. It was a true, magnificent masterpiece. It was taller and more beautiful than his original drawing. It had dozens of shining silver stars, a dark blue painted sky made of expensive glass, and a delicate, glowing golden moon. Deep inside its beautiful, complex chest, the magical golden gear rested quietly, perfectly connected to 100 other delicate wheels. Elias stared at his beautiful creation. His bandaged hands were shaking violently. He reached into his vest pocket for the small, heavy brass winding key. He pushed the key into the side of the clock. He took a deep, trembling breath and turned it carefully, exactly 3 times. Click, click, click. He stepped back and waited. He held his breath. He waited for the grand magic to start. He waited for the gears to turn, the stars to spin, and the beautiful ticking sound to fill the empty room. But nothing happened. The golden gear did not move. The silver wheels stayed perfectly still. The stars did not spin. The clock did not tick. It was just cold, dead metal. A cold, dark, suffocating despair washed over Elias. The absolute heavy silence of the room pressed painfully against his ears, mocking him. It was a cruel, terrible silence. All the physical pain, all the bleeding bandaged fingers, all the sleepless, lonely nights, it was all for absolutely nothing. He had built a beautiful, useless shell. It was broken, and he did not know how to fix it. I am a fool, he thought, his chest tight with panic and tears burning his tired eyes. I was always a fool. I should have stayed in my safe little life. The dark voice in his mind screamed at him with terrible power. It told him to destroy the evidence of his terrible failure before anyone saw it. He wanted to run back to his comfortable, boring life. He wanted to forget he ever had a dream. Elias looked across the desk. He saw his tools. He saw a heavy, solid iron hammer resting in the dark shadows. He reached out. He grabbed the thick wooden handle. The hammer felt incredibly heavy, cold and brutal in his shaking hand. He looked back at the delicate, magnificent glass clock. The contrast made him sick to his stomach. He hated the machine for making him hope. He hated himself for believing he could be a master. His breathing became incredibly fast. It was shallow. His heart pounded in his chest like a wild animal. With a cry of pain and anger, he raised the heavy iron hammer high in the air. The cold sweat on Elias's face dripped down his chin. His muscles were tight. They were shaking. The silence in the room was unbearable. The dark voice commanded him, "Destroy it! Break the glass! Smash the gears! Return to the comfort of the ordinary! Do it now!" He tightly closed his eyes, crying, and let the heavy hammer fall. But the heavy iron hammer never hit the delicate glass. It stopped moving in the cold air, just 1 single inch above the beautiful face of the clock. Elias opened his eyes. His breath was shaking violently, and a hot tear rolled down his wrinkled cheek. But suddenly, his mind felt very, very clear. The dark panic was completely gone. He looked down at his rough, bandaged hands holding the heavy wooden handle. They were covered in small, painful cuts and dark purple bruises from months of incredibly difficult work. For the first time in his entire life, as he looked at those scars, he was not ashamed of himself. It does not matter if it never works, he thought, a wave of deep, profound peace washing over his tired soul. I built it. I fought my own fear. I finally tried to do something great. He realized, in that quiet, frozen moment, that he did not care. If the people of Oakhaven ever saw his masterpiece, he did not need anyone to clap for him or call him a master. He cared that he had finally fought his own weakness and won. He gently, slowly pulled his arm back and put the heavy iron hammer down on the dark wooden desk. The sharp, terrifying danger in the room instantly disappeared, replaced by a warm, quiet sense of total acceptance. Elias picked up his thick magnifying glass and a tiny, delicate silver tool. He leaned very close to the beautiful machine. With a calm, peaceful, and perfectly steady hand, he made one tiny, patient adjustment to the side of the golden gear. Click, and then a sound broke the heavy silence. Tick. A full second passed. Tock. It was a rich, echoing, deeply beautiful tick-tock. Slowly, the delicate silver wheels began to turn. The dark blue glass sky inside the clock moved smoothly, and the delicate golden moon began to slowly rise. The silver stars turned. The magnificent machine was alive. It was perfect. It is truly beautiful. A deep, familiar voice said from the corner of the room. Elias gasped and turned around quickly. Standing in the dark shadows of the shop was the mysterious traveler. He had entered the locked room without making a single sound. Slowly, the stranger pushed back his heavy, wet, dark hood. There was no anger in his eyes, only a very gentle, proud smile on his face. The golden gear, Elias whispered, pointing a shaking finger at the warm light. The magic. There is no magic in the metal, Elias, the stranger said softly, walking closer to the wooden desk. The clock has no magical power to tell the future. The golden gear is just a piece of perfectly polished ordinary brass. The test, my brave friend, was never about the machine. Elias looked at the magnificent clock, ticking perfectly, and then back at the tall traveler. He frowned. He did not understand. The magic was the challenge itself, the stranger explained, his voice warm and kind. You were living in a dark prison built entirely by your own fear. You thought you were protecting yourself from failure, but you were slowly dying in the comfort of this small room. I gave you an impossible task because it was the only way to wake your sleeping spirit up. You had to struggle. You had to face your own terrible doubt. You had to bleed. Through this painful journey, you have transformed from a fearful man into a brave master. Elias turned slowly to look at the glass window. The harsh winter sky was suddenly quiet. He watched the very first white snowflake of winter falling outside the window, landing softly on the gray cobblestone street. He listened to the peaceful, rhythmic, perfect ticking of his masterpiece. The stranger was absolutely right. For the first time in 20 long years, his heart was completely free. If we look at Elias's life from high above, the story feels like this. First, there was a quiet, tired man named Elias. He lived in the cold, foggy city of Oakhaven. He was a clockmaker. Every single day, he worked in his small, dusty shop. He fixed ordinary, cheap watches for the simple people in his town. He did the same thing every day. His life was very safe, very predictable, and very quiet. But Elias had a secret pain in his heart. Deep in his dark desk drawer, he hid a beautiful old leather sketchbook. It held the design for a grand, impossible machine called the Clock of Destiny. He wanted to build it more than anything, but he was too afraid. He told himself he was not a master. He chose a comfortable, boring life because he was deeply scared to fail. Then, one dark and stormy night, everything in his life changed. A tall, mysterious stranger came into the quiet shop. The stranger gave Elias a glowing, beautiful golden gear. He told Elias he must finish his dream clock before the first snow of winter, or the magic would turn to useless dust. So, Elias started to work. It was very, very hard. His old hands hurt, his metal tools broke, and many times he wanted to quit. He worked through the cold, windy autumn, fighting his own fear every single day. He fought the dark voice in his head. Finally, the grand clock was finished. It was the cold night before the first snow. Elias turned the winding key, but the beautiful clock did not tick. It was completely silent. It was broken. Elias felt a terrible pain in his chest. He was so angry and sad that he picked up a heavy, dangerous iron hammer. He was ready to smash his beautiful dream into pieces. But at the last second, he stopped. He looked at his tired, rough, bandaged hands. He realized he was proud that he had finally tried. He put the heavy hammer down. He was no longer afraid of his own failure. With a calm, peaceful heart, he made one tiny adjustment to the golden gear, and then he heard it tick-tock. The magnificent clock came alive. Suddenly, the mysterious stranger stepped out of the dark shadows. He smiled kindly at the old clockmaker. The stranger told him the wonderful truth. There was no real magic in the golden gear. The clock could not tell the future. The real magic was the difficult journey. The hard, painful work had changed Elias forever. He was no longer a fearful man hiding in a dusty shop. He had built his own courage. As the beautiful ticking sound filled the room, Elias watched the first snow fall outside his window. He was finally happy. Now, let us hear the emotional story from Elias himself. For 20 long years, I lived a very small, very quiet life. I remember the smell of dust and old oil in my shop. Every day, I listened to the endless ticking of ordinary cheap clocks. I fixed things for other people, but I was broken inside. I kept a beautiful leather sketchbook hidden in my bottom drawer. I wanted to build a grand masterpiece. I wanted to build the Clock of Destiny. But I was too afraid to try. I thought I was simply not good enough. I chose to be comfortable instead of being brave. Then, one cold, stormy night, the wind brought a stranger to my door. I saw his dark, wet cloak, and I saw the glowing golden gear he placed on my desk. He told me to build my dream before the first snow, or the magic would disappear forever. I felt terrified. I did not want to fail, but I could not look away from the warm, shining metal. It called to me. The journey to build it was the hardest thing I have ever done. My hands were shaking every single day. I cut my fingers on the sharp brass, and I had to wrap them in thick white bandages. I was entirely exhausted. There were many dark, lonely nights when I stared at the dying fire and wanted to throw the golden gear into the ashes. I wanted to quit. I wanted to go back to my safe, easy life. But a small, quiet voice inside me said, "Elias, try one more time." When the clock of destiny was finally finished, I turned the tau, small brass key. But nothing happened. There was only a heavy, cold silence in the room. I felt a terrible darkness in my chest. I thought I was a fool. I picked up a heavy iron hammer, and I wanted to smash my beautiful clock into 1,000 pieces. I was so angry at myself. But as I held the hammer high in the air, I looked at my rough, damaged hands. I realized I was proud of those scars. I had finally tried to do something great. I put the hammer down. I felt a deep peace because I was no longer afraid of my own failure. With a calm heart, I made one tiny adjustment to the metal. And then, I heard the first tick. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. When the stranger smiled and told me the truth, I finally understood everything. The golden gear was just metal. The magic was never in the clock. The magic was the difficult journey. I built the machine, but the challenge built me. I am no longer a fearful man hiding in the shadows. I am free. Outside Elias's window, the thick white fog of Oakhaven finally began to clear. The heavy winter clouds separated in the dark sky, and the quiet night revealed a million shining silver stars. Just as the terrible storm had passed over the city, the heavy fog of fear in Elias's mind had completely lifted. He was no longer a fearful man hiding in the dark shadows of his own comfort. He stood in the center of his warm shop, took a long, peaceful breath, and listened to the steady, beautiful ticking of his dream. My friend, we all have a dusty sketchbook hidden somewhere deep inside of us. We all have a quiet dream, a grand goal, or a secret hope that we are deeply afraid to build. Sometimes we lock it away in a dark drawer because we think we are not ready, or we believe we are simply not good enough. We choose the easy comfort of our ordinary, safe routines. But comfort will never bring you true peace. It will only keep you locked in a small, safe room while the beautiful world moves forward without you. Remember this simple truth. Your destiny is not something you magically find. It is something you build with your own two hands. The real magic of life is not in being perfect on the very first day. The magic is in the quiet courage to pick up your tools and begin, even when your hands are shaking with fear. Just like Elias, learning to build his magnificent clock, your journey of learning English requires patience, time, and steady effort. Some days, your words will flow beautifully and easily. Other days, you might feel like your tools are completely broken, and you might want to quit. You might feel embarrassed. But every time you listen to a story, every time you speak a new word, and every time you try again, you are making a tiny, brave adjustment to your own mind. You are building your own courage, piece by piece. If this story helped your English tonight, and if you enjoyed spending this quiet time together, please like the video and subscribe to our channel for more calm English stories. Write a comment below and tell me, what is a dream you are building right now in your own life? Do not be afraid to share it with the world. You can also listen to this story again tomorrow to practice your speaking, shadow the new vocabulary, and improve your deep understanding. Until next time, rest well, keep practicing your English, and never be afraid to step out of the shadows. Good night.